Muy bien, buenos días a todos. El año pasado nosotros, cuando estábamos en tiempos de pandemia, tuvimos dentro de nuestros webinars un encuentro con el señor Drumayer, que nos acompaña de manera presencial. Eso. Y al cual le damos nuestra más cordial y afectuosa bienvenida porque es un honor para nosotros que nos visite una persona de esta calidad humana, de este talante intelectual, pues ya les voy a mostrar, y de el talante vital que tiene, porque su vida es interesante. Yo les voy a compartir algo de su vida que él nos escribió para que compartiéramos. Entonces, su nombre es Drufus Mayer, ¿verdad? Pero se hace llamar Drew. eh, Nació en Texas, Dallas, Estados Unidos. Tiene 2 hijas y 3 nietos. En el año 1968 recibió su título de licenciado en Ciencias Matemáticas en la Universidad de Texas. Un año después, cuando estaba cursando su especialización en la Universidad de Watt, tuvo que servir al ejército de Estados Unidos. Fue allí donde lo capacitaron en temas sobre guerras radiológicas, biológicas y químicas. Sirvió a su país en Vietnam en el año 1970 por un año y al volver pudo retomar sus estudios universitarios y graduarse como doctor en química orgánica con una segunda especialización en química médica en 1974. Respecto a la guerra de Vietnam, Drew quisiera comentarnos que para él esa experiencia fue la más educativa. En 1980 obtuvo el máster en ciencias de la en la Universidad de Bristol, en Inglaterra, en el área de ciencia coloide y de la superficie. Trabajó para los laboratorios de investigación de la empresa Kodak en Nueva York. Se especializó en la síntesis y aplicación del sistema de polímeros para aplicaciones en la fotografía, la serografía, el análisis clínico, entre otros. Pudo realizar su máster en Inglaterra, patrocinado por la empresa Kodak, trabajando en procesos técnicos y problemas relacionados a las interacciones interfaciales. En el año 1983 comenzó a trabajar como consultor técnico independiente para poder así alejarse de la dureza y la crueldad del invierno de Nueva York, habiendo tenido varias experiencias muy duras durante los fríos inviernos. Conoció a una bella mujer de Río Tercero, a una bella dama de Río Tercero, con quien se casó, y se embarcó hacia esta nueva democracia que la Argentina le ofrecía, junto a su familia conformada por 2 pequeñas niñas de 1 y 3 años de edad. Drew nos comenta que para su familia era una aventura a lo desconocido, pero decidieron igualmente mudarse a la ciudad de Río Tercero, donde sigue viviendo actualmente. Está retirado parcialmente, aunque dedicado a la especialización en las ciencias. Durante los primeros años de esta aventura en Argentina, comenzó a escribir un libro, tratando de explicarle a sus amigos y familiares en Estados Unidos por qué había decidido mudarse hasta el fin del mundo. El libro tiene 480 páginas, no fue publicado, está en inglés y si alguno quisiera leerlo, está disponible. Ha escrito libros sobre el fenómeno interfacial de la superficie. El primer libro ya lleva 4 ediciones, el segundo lleva una segunda edición y ha sido traducido al chino. Es coautor de varias patentes americanas y europeas sobre los sistemas de los polímeros y sus aplicaciones y otros temas no relacionados a la química. Ha participado en varios semanarios sobre su especialidad en la Universidad Nacional de Córdoba y en la Universidad Nacional de Río Cuarto. En 1999 fue intérprete y traductor durante la revisión de las evidencias e informes sobre las explosiones en Fábrica Militar Río Tercero de 1995. después de la experiencia como traductor en la investigación Klein de las explosiones de 1995, escribió él mismo un análisis profesional de los eventos basados en su propia experiencia sobre explosivos con eventos similares. El libro está en español, pero no ha sido publicado. Hoy, con mucha alegría, con mucho orgullo, con mucha satisfacción, lo tenemos entre nosotros. Toda una personalidad, ustedes escucharon su currículum, ¿no? Bueno, toda una personalidad que a nosotros nos honra con su presencia. Y nos va a hablar sobre la sociedad estadounidense, la educación, la economía y la política, entre otros temas. Y después quedará abierto para que ustedes puedan dialogar y hacer sus preguntas. Así que Drew, muy bienvenido y lo dejamos que comience a compartirnos a los estudiantes sus reflexiones.
Well, is the microphone working okay? Okay. Well, thank you, Jose. It is Jose, right? And everyone else for the invitation. After hearing all of that, I am more impressed with myself than I am impressed with myself, if you know what I mean. It sounds impressive, I guess. And it is. I've had an interesting life, and I'm more than happy to pass along some of my vast wisdom of living to anyone who's interested in asking. And I'm always glad to accept invitations to talk to students here or anywhere else for that matter. I must admit that I'm rather overwhelmed by the number of people in the audience. I wasn't expecting quite an SRO crowd. That means standing room only in English. But I will try to do my best to make it a useful and possibly even enjoyable hour and a half or hour, whatever it is that it turns out to be. I have no particular limitations on my time. To begin with, for those of you out here who listened to, suffered from, or suffered through the virtual discussion we had a few months back on politics and things in the United States, I must apologize for going on and on. Once you get me going, sometimes it's hard for me to pull the plug. I don't wear a watch. I haven't worn a watch for 50 years, I guess. And so sometimes I lose track of time. Today we'll try to keep things a little bit more under control. I like live presentations because I like to answer questions. It's easier for me to answer questions than it is for me to write some kind of script that I need to follow and then keep to that script. So I encourage all of the questions, any questions that you have. There are not many topics that I won't give you an opinion on. So feel free to ask questions. If at some time I begin to speak too quickly for you and you don't understand, or I say a phrase or a word that you don't understand, feel free to interrupt. If it's just for slowing down, just raise two hands. That way I'll know you don't have a question, but I need to slow down. If it's a question, you can raise one. As Jose said in my introduction, I am a Texan, born and raised in Texas, and will always be a Texan. Quite often when people ask where I'm from, I will say Texas before I will say the United States, because Texans are born and raised Texans are very proud of being Texans. We're very nationalistic because Texas is the only state that was an actual independent country before it became a state of the Union. Being from Texas also means that I am probably more conservative than many people in the United States because Texans are generally conservative people. So if you ask me a question that has some kind of even the slightest political side to it, it's probable that my answer will be biased to the conservative side, which would be the right. in most places. Can I speak from this distance to the microphone? Still hear me okay? I am very anti-socialist. I am anti-communist. I am anti anything that goes from the middle to the left. For most things, not all things, but for most things. So I want you to know, to begin with, that I have very strong political biases in my opinions. I think I sent a little, wouldn't even call it an outline, it's like 5 lines to give the subject of what I would try to present today. And you may have noticed that the title was longer than anything else in there, and it said something like Life in the States to Yesterday, because I can talk about life in the States yesterday because I lived life in the States yesterday. Today, followed by a number of question marks, because right now in the United States, there is a great deal of social, economic, political turmoil going on. And so really no one knows what's going on. And the third one is tomorrow, with question marks, exclamation points, and all of that for the same reason. Right now, we don't know what's going to happen in the United States. We don't know what the United States is going to be like 5 or 10 years from now, or possibly even 2 years from now. So I can't address too much those areas because no one knows. No one knows. It's a real problem for everyone. But yesterday I can talk about that. Yesterday I remember well. I think the first topic on that list of topics was the social life in the United States. The United States is an extremely heterogeneous country. We have a large diversity in population, although most of the population is Anglo-Saxon, Caucasian, however you want to put it, white, if you want to use a racially touchy term. I think right now maybe 19% of the U.S. population is what we call black, Afro-American. Some of them having nothing to do with Africa, but they're still considered Afro-Americans. For instance, Haitians are considered Afro-American, even though they're black and they've lived in Haiti for centuries. They were the first black slaves to gain independence in the Western Hemisphere. I think the Latin population in the United States, or Latino as they like to be called, is probably around 23 to 25%. I could be wrong about that, especially now that the influx of migrants from Central and South America is a very significant problem. And no one really knows how many Latino migrants there are in the United States. Many of them illegal. Illegal, meaning they didn't come through the gate. They came across the river or across the desert. And so we don't know. The guesswork is maybe 11 or 12 million migrants in the United States are there illegally. In the first 9 months of this year, 1.7 million migrants have come to the United States across from Mexico that we know about, that have been counted and then released. Probably several thousands, if not hundreds of thousands more who have entered. We also have Asian populations and whatnot, but it's still a majority white population. It's very diverse in the sense that the social lives of the social life of the country is not a single thing. Social life in the South is one thing. South and Southwest is one thing. Social life on the West Coast, California, Oregon, Washington, is quite a bit different from the social life in the South. Social life in the Northeast is different. So there's a lot of diversity in social life, norms, social norms, and the way people interact. throughout the country. There is no one United States in terms of society. Many countries, Argentina is pretty much homogeneous socially. Mate, universal. Asado, universal. Certain things in Argentina are pretty much the same no matter where you go in Argentina. In the United States, it's not that way. Being from Texas, I grew up in a certain social environment. I did my doctoral degree in the University of Utah. The University of Utah is in what they call the Intermountain West, between the Rocky Mountains and the Sierra Madres in California. Utah was founded by members of the Mormon Church. That's the headquarters of the Mormon Church. Social life in Utah was not the same as social life in Texas. After finishing that, I went to work in Rochester, New York. That's in the north. It's about as close to Canada as you can get on Lake Ontario without being in Canada. The social life there was different to the social life in Texas. So it's a very broad spectrum of social interactions that you can encounter in the United States. So there is no one United States. People who I know say, well, I want to know the United States. And I say, where are you going to go on your trip? I'm going to Miami and Orlando. Miami and Orlando are not the United States. They are very far from being the United States. No, we're going to New York. That is not the United States. Los Angeles and San Francisco are not the United States. Chicago used to be a pretty good idea of how, of an average city in the United States. It's not so much anymore. But to know the United States, you have to make a trip, rent a van, and we have fantastic throughways and highways. Just drive around, stop in small towns, eat in small town restaurants, this sort of thing. Then you can get to know a little bit about the United States. You can never know it all. I don't know it all. I've lived in many parts, and still I'm blank on many things. Along with the social variabilities in the United States, there are also accent variabilities in the United States. There are places in the United States where I can go and I have a very difficult time understanding what the people are saying because of their accents. As Texans have very particular accents. Texas is in fact something like a Cordoba of the United States. Has a different sense of humor. It has its own accent, its own way of doing certain things. And that's Texas and Cordoba. Even the cows look the same. I remember many years back, my mother came to visit here in Rio Tercero. And as we were driving back from the airport in Cordoba, she was sitting there looking around out the car window. And she said, I think I'm still in Texas. The cows look the same. The trees look the same. The cars look the same. I haven't left Texas yet, because it is. It's that way. It's just practically the same. So that's the way it is. And there are many accents. I was once accused when I was doing graduate work outside of Texas of lying about being a Texan. They say, you can't be a Texan. You don't have a Texas accent. And that's true. All of my family have very strong Texas accents, the Texas drawl, the way of sing-songing when we talk, and that sort of thing. And they said, you can't be from Texas, you don't have a Texas accent. Well, I showed them my driver's license and birth certificate and said, I'm from Texas. But I never had a Texas accent. I don't know why. Inexplicable for me. But I just never developed a Texas accent. So, but that's an interesting thing, because you can go to South Carolina in the deep South, they call it, the sort of east of Texas, and their accents are different. They're sing-song, they go up and down, and they have a nice way of talking. They call people, yes, sweetheart, and yes, darling, and things like this. It's just the way you talk, But it's interesting. It's an interesting study to hear the different American accents. Social life in the United States in my day was very relaxed. We were teenagers. We had fun. We went to school. I had a fantastic secondary education. We had fun. We had parties. We would go out to the river and swim. I remember great times in education. Now you talk to kids in high school in the United States, and it's a disaster. They're dying. They hate it. They can't get along with their friends. They can't do this. I don't know what happened, but something happened between the 1960s and the 1990s and the 2000s where life as an adolescent went to pot, if you hear them say it. It's a shame. As I said, I had a wonderful time in high school. Dating was a big thing. You had a girlfriend or you had a boyfriend. You would go out on Friday night or Saturday night, go to the movies, then go to what we call the drive-in. It's sort of a place where you bought hamburgers and French fries and Cokes and things like that, and talked with your friends, and you drove around and around and around downtown, all sorts of fun stuff. Nobody ever got in trouble, essentially. No trouble. That's changed. That's changed apparently, and it's a shame because I think that was a good life experience, a learning experience. Excuse me. I have to take a break occasionally because my throat's been harassing me. So anyway, that's sort of a brief description of social life. You have questions? And ask them. I think the next one on the list was education, if I'm not mistaken. It's hard to remember. There were only 4 things. Still have a hard time remembering what those 4 things are. Getting old. Education in the United States is free through high school. Every child is entitled to a free education from not always kindergarten, but from first grade on up through high school. The state controls the education. The state builds and maintains the schools. The state gives you books that you use. Your textbooks are free. They loan them to you. You use them, and you hopefully give them back in good condition so that the kids next year can use them. The education is controlled or has been controlled by the states, not the federal government. The federal government has no constitutional involvement in education, theoretically, and it's all left to the states, so that the states have local control over the schools, how they're run, what they teach, that sort of thing. The federal government can control quality aspects. For instance, if a state has the schools for poor areas are of much worse quality than schools for rich areas, the federal government can come in and say, you got to straighten this out. The schools have to be essentially equal in their quality. Equal opportunity for all students of whatever race, color, creed to obtain a good education. This is the theory, as is usually the case when people are involved. Theories are not always perfect or do not work out perfectly, so that the education system has variations depending on where you are, how much money is available in that particular area, and those sorts of things. But it has worked pretty well up until now. Now, education is a very, very, very hot topic in the United States. The federal government is trying to inject itself more and more into running local education systems. Parents in local education systems are beginning to fight back, and they're beginning to make progress in doing that. And it is one of the more important political topics in the United States right now. Who controls education? And who controls what is taught in education? Once you get out of high school, however, education is no longer free. If you want to go to the universities are expensive. If you want to go to Harvard, Princeton, Yale, the big name universities, which I do not like, you can expect to pay roughly $100,000 to $120,000 per year for that education. Well, I shouldn't say you are expected. Your parents are expected to pay that kind of money for a education. Those are, of course, private universities. Private universities are almost always more expensive than public universities. They're perfectly good public universities. Every state in the union has a number of public universities which are significantly less expensive than Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Stanford, and those big names. And being who I am, I have to inject a personal story here. When I was working at Kodak, once I had established myself as a halfway competent scientist, I became involved in interviewing new applicants for getting jobs at the Kodak Research Laboratories. We had applicants from universities everywhere. We had applicants from Harvard, Princeton, Yale, MIT, Stanford. And I can say with absolute truthfulness that we never, ever hired an applicant from Harvard, Princeton, Yale. I can remember one person from MIT. Because those people didn't know what they were talking about. They were pure window dressing. I don't know if you know what that means, but you know, when you put a mannequin in a store and you put a very nice dress on the mannequin and you decorate it all nice and pretty, that's called window dressing. It's nice to look at, but once you get inside, sometimes the substance beneath the mannequin itself is not all that great. And we never hired someone from Harvard, Princeton, or Yale. But the state universities that are cheaper are good. They're good. There's some fantastic ones. They're very large. They have excellent research. They have excellent faculties, and they do a good job. But you have to pay for it. Nothing's free. There's a lot of financial help available. There are many, many, many scholarships, grants, work opportunities that you can do to help pay for that. But it's not free. Somebody's going to pay for it. Your parents or somebody else is going to pay for it. When I went to school, every summer I had a job. I would work the job during the summer. One thing, to make money to have fun during the summer, that's okay. You deserve that. And the other is to put a little bit back so that when I couldn't work the job and had to study, I had a little money put back to do a few things. So that's the thing. Higher education is not free in the United States. Some people in the current political scene want to make it free. They want the federal government to pay for everything. They are living in another universe because the cost is enormous. Faculty members in large universities make a lot of money. I mean, even a small university, they may make $80,000 or $90,000 a year, a small place. Faculty members at the big universities may make $150,000, $180,000 a year, some of them even more. And just so you know, the highest paid members of a university staff generally are the coaches of their American football teams, their basketball teams, and things like that. They make several $1 million a year. Because sports in American education and American universities is big business. They bring in lots of money for the games. Alumni who are sports fans donate millions of dollars to support the university so that they can maintain their teams at the top of the national rating. It's a very, very big business. And not only that, the professional sports, the NBA, Major League Baseball, National Football League, all of these things, their players come from the universities. The universities not only train scientists and writers, And all of these things, they train professional athletes. And those professional athletes make millions of dollars. I'm not saying that as a compliment to the system, but that's just the way it is. Economics. I notice you don't have a clock here, so I can't keep track of myself. But anyway, I'll move on now to economics. The United States has traditionally, long before that, has been the economic powerhouse of the world. Innovation, production, all of these important things, and bringing in products, new technology, and offering these products to North Americans and to the world has been since World War II. We have been number one. Possibly 20 years ago, politicians and businessmen, more businessmen than politicians at the began to basically sell off the United States as the production and technological leader in the world by sending production to offshore, as they call it, sending the production offshore, basically to China. When I was still at Kodak, Kodak began to install production plants in China. Before that, all Kodak production was in Rochester, New York, or with a little bit in London, and outside of Paris in Europe. There was no production anywhere else in the world. Now, there is almost no production of Kodak in the United States. When I left Kodak, the workforce in Rochester was 45,000 people in one area. The employees of Kodak who are now in Rochester number about 18,000. All the rest of those jobs went to China. Apple, China. Hewlett-Packard, China. All big production is now done in China with some minor things in places like there's production in Vietnam, production in El Salvador, mostly clothes, production in Bangladesh, mostly clothes, those kinds of things where they could get cheap labor. And they did it, and the only person who ever tried to reverse that trend was Donald Trump, like him or not like him. One of his ideas was make it in the United States. At this point in time, right now, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of large ships floating in the sea off the coast of California because they can't get into the port to unload their goods because all of those products come from China and those other areas. And it's another big political problem in the United States right now. That now they say people won't get their Christmas presents because their Christmas presents can't be unloaded from the ships because they all come from China and the ports can't handle them. And even if they can get them in the port, the truck drivers, there are not enough truck drivers to take them from the ports in California and spread them out through all the United States. Right now, if you can get a job as a truck driver, you can make a very good salary. I have a nephew who's a truck driver. He makes $80,000 a year annual salary. Of course, being a truck driver, you have to have a special kind of character. You live on the road a lot, you eat on the road a lot, you sleep on the road a lot. And so it's not an easy job, especially if you have a family. But the jobs are there. At this point, after the mess that was made, or the mess that appeared due to COVID and the pandemic and all of that, they assumed that once we started coming out of the pandemic that the economy would boot up again and people would start working and production would go back to normal. Didn't happen. Part of the pandemic treatment that the government gave in the United States was to essentially give people money. If you were unemployed because you couldn't, the place you worked couldn't continue working because of the pandemic, the government started giving you an extra $600 a week as unemployment insurance above and beyond what you would have gotten normally from the state. They gave checks roughly, well, it happened twice. Once it was first time it was $2,000 to everybody who was who was working or retired. I got $2,000 living down here. I'm retired in the United States. They send me $2,000. They did this to everybody who fit the qualifications. That was about 130 million people. 130 million people got checks for $2,000 last year. They did the same thing again this year, except it wasn't $2,000. It was only $1,400 this year. I mean, it's great. I wasn't going to send it back to the government, but that's a lot of money. And where does the money come from? If people aren't working, they're not paying taxes. If they're not paying taxes, the government doesn't get money. And so it starts turning on the Xerox machine and starts spitting out $100 bills, this sort of thing. And one particular political party wants to continue doing that for the next 10 years, more or less. Where's the money going to come from? They don't know, but they say it's not going to cost them, which is, of course, stupid. It will cost. Somebody has to pay for it. Right now in the United States, the current annual inflation rate is 5.7%. Annual. Now for Argentina, so what? You know, that's the monthly inflation rate pretty much. So who cares? In the United States, it's the annual inflation rate. That is the highest inflation rate we've had since, I think it's 1986. Long time ago. People are not happy. They may get a pay raise in their paycheck of 4%, but inflation is 5.7%. You're losing money. And these are the you and me guys, the common guys who go out and work for a living. It makes for a very, very, very tricky political situation. The Democrats, who are now in control of the government, says, "Oh, this will go away. We'll get everything all worked out." This is what they said in March, April. Well, it's gotten worse since March and April, and it's making the political situation in the United States extremely, extremely volatile. I have found one of the disadvantages to living in Argentina is that it's very difficult for me to know what's really going on in the news in the United States day by day. Unfortunately, my only real source is what I can glean from Facebook, for instance. I don't like Facebook, but I have no option, so I have to use Facebook to get certain things that haven't been blocked on Facebook. Facebook does a lot of blocking. If they don't like what you say, it doesn't appear. And just so you know, Facebook changed its name now. It's no longer called Facebook. It's called, I don't remember what it's called. Meta. I don't know where that comes from. Meta what? Meta is sort of almost halfway not, depending on the context. But they changed the name to Meta. That's about the only source I have now. I have friends who send me posts, and of course they're all conservatives because that's what I'm interested in. But I admit that. But anyway, it's a mess, and that's why when I said today I put all of the question marks behind it, because nobody knows. Next year there are what they call interim elections. No presidential election, but they renew the entire Congress and 1/3 of the senators in the Congress. If it were held today, the Democrats would practically disappear from the Congress, except from California, the West Coast, and the far Northeast, New York, Massachusetts, because those states will always elect Democrats. But the rest of the country would kick the bums out, as the saying goes in American politics. However, between now and next fall, when the real elections occur, who knows what? So it's all a big question. And the part of tomorrow, where I put the question marks, the exclamation marks, and everything else, depends vitally on what happens next year in these elections and in 2024 when there's another presidential election. Presidential election in 2024 is a tricky thing. I'm a conservative. That means to most people in the United States that I support Donald Trump. I have said from the beginning that I do not like Donald Trump. I never voted for Donald Trump in 2 elections. I find him personally disagreeable, to say the least. But I do agree with the politics and economics of Donald Trump. That puts me in a bind, because I can't support the politics and economics of Donald Trump without being accused of being a MAGA Donald Trump nut. Even though every time I would post, which I don't do anymore for personal reasons, I would post on Facebook, I do not like Donald Trump. I have never liked Donald Trump, but I agree with Donald Trump. And no, that doesn't matter. If Trump is in there, you're dead. So that's the problem. Donald Trump is still out there beating the bush, being annoying. Won't say if he's going to run for president again in 2024. I hope not. If he does, it will be a disaster, because so many people hate Donald Trump that they'll vote against him no matter who the other one is, just like they did with Joe Biden. Joe Biden was elected because Donald Trump was the opponent. He wasn't elected because he had enough sense to be president. Anything to vote against Donald Trump. And that's dangerous. Hopefully, Trump will come to his senses and say, okay, I choose not to run. The Republicans can look for somebody. There are a lot of good candidates out there, reasonable, more middle of the road people. And here's hoping. And that's all I'm going to say about politics. I put politics down there, but I soon realized that politics is sort of a quicksand, a black hole. You can fall into discussing politics, talk your head off, bore everybody to death, and accomplish nothing. So what I would like to do, I don't know how long I've been going, but what I would like to do now is encourage you to ask me some questions that I can answer more specifically. My piece, I want you to tell me what you want to know, and I'll answer just about any question you can come up with. Good morning.
Okay. Well, good morning. I was reading about the elections, and the were about this idea of the fraud. Federal election.
I got the question. I don't know if everyone else heard the question, but what's my opinion of fraud in the, I assume you're talking about the 2020 election. Or 2020, the previous election. Fraud is a touchy question. Fraud is sort of deliberate stealing of votes, or either putting wrong votes in, or taking wrong votes out. That some of that occurred, I have no doubt. I mean, it's documented that it did happen to some extent. Whether it was enough to change the election, I don't know. But the one thing that I know is absolutely true is that many states, and for instance, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona and Georgia, all of those states and some others, Nevada as well, changed their election laws just before the election. And they were changed by the administration. The U.S. Constitution very specifically says that election laws must be created by the state legislature. They cannot, that's written in the Constitution. Those states and some others changed the laws without going to the legislature to get them changed. That is, by definition, unconstitutional. If the Constitution says the legislature has to do it, and they change them without the legislature, then the laws are unconstitutional. Unfortunately, the courts, the federal courts, and especially the Supreme Court, have a long policy of shying away and avoiding, by any means possible, making any decision related to something as delicate as elections. Several cases were sent to the Supreme Court concerning the states that changed their laws unconstitutionally, and they were all rejected by the Supreme Court without comment. They just rejected them. They couldn't make any comment because the only comment they would make was, we don't look at those things. And the Supreme Court shouldn't say that. But yes, those things were unconstitutional, should have been illegal, and should have, by judicial decision, been corrected in the election. But that's not fraud in the normal legal sense of the word. So was there hanky-panky? I don't know if you know what hanky-panky is in English, but it's sort of not doing things exactly the way you're supposed to do it. Doing things sort of under the table, bajo la mesa. So, corrupt, yes, but it doesn't come to, in the United States, in politics and in the justice system, it doesn't come to the point of being corruption. It comes to hanky-panky. It's sort of a softer word of not doing it exactly the way you're supposed to do it. Of course, hanky-panky can also have to do with personal relationships. You know, that guy's married, but he's doing a little bit of hanky-panky with that other girl over there. You know, so it's a very broad word that you can use in many different ways. Okay, next.
Good morning. Is it too loud? Good morning. My name is Octavio.
I'm sorry, but I'm sure I won't remember your name. So, but thank you for saying it.
Um, I have a question related with this section. As you mentioned recently, something about the Republicans members that would have been chosen. I remember some of them was, maybe I would like to know your opinion about Ron Paul. But besides that, I have another question that is related with economics. Possibly talking about the Austrian college. There is a writer who's now dead called Spooner, who wrote No Betray, I guess that is in English. In Spanish is Sin Traición, but basically it says that the Constitution has no authority. In Argentina is a clear example. However, how do you think that happens in USA?
First, I'll do the easy one. Rand Paul, I know who Rand Paul is. He is a Republican, but he's a very liberal, independent Republican. He is becoming most famous now because of his interactions and fights with Fauci, so over masking, vaccination mandates, and this sort of thing, and basically lying, according to Rand Paul, Fauci lying about U.S. involvement and paying for virus research to the Wuhan Institute in China, where most likely the COVID-19 virus started. And he has been very vocal, and I agree with him. But he's very independent. Some things he gets a little bit carried away with. He's very very conservative and very single-minded in what he does. I like him. I mean, he's not my favorite, but I like him. I think he does what he's supposed to do. And he and Fauci have been going at it for months. Fauci calls him a liar. He calls Fauci a liar. And so it goes back and forth. He's fun. He's fun to watch. But I like him. I think politicians should be that way. I don't like politicians who are cheap. They have a ring in their nose, and the ones who are running the show, the top dogs, drag them around by the nose, and they don't say anything. They don't say anything. Most Democratic congressmen and senators, you never hear from them. They're afraid to say anything. If they say the wrong thing, their big bosses are going to jump up and down on their heads and ruin their careers. So they want to stay in the Congress, make a lot of money in the Congress. There's a good, $160,000 base salary, I think, for being a congressman or a senator. That's a good living. You don't have to work all that hard. You just have to put up with a little BS from now and then. But most of them just sort of keep their head down and dodge the bullet and prefer to leave the talking to the big guys. Rand Paul is not that way. He'll get out there and he'll say what he wants to say, come hell or high water, as my Texas brethren say. And he's good. As for this writer, Spooner, I don't know who he is and I've never heard of him, but if he says the Constitution has no authority, he's obviously an idiot. That's what the Constitution is. The Constitution is the authority. By definition, the Constitution is the authority. And everything else, it is the primary law of the land by definition. If you do not follow the Constitution, then you are breaking or destroying the basic law of the land. So I don't know who he is, but if that's what he's saying, I think he's an idiot. Ignorable, totally ignorable. Anybody else?
Yes, it's me. Previously said business under table about corruption. Have you ever seen corruption in judicial power? Power.
In what?
Judicial power. Judicial power.
Judicial power? Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Oh, yes. Not as much as here, if you'll excuse me for saying it. But yes, where humans are involved, corruption is almost always going to be present to some extent. Historically in the United States, up until maybe the 50s, early 60s, it was actually quite common in small places, like a small town judge or something like that, takes a little money under the table to give somebody a 1-year prison sentence instead of a 10-year prison sentence or something like that. Yeah, that kind of corruption, I think, is pretty much to be found in any judicial system in any country in the world. The higher you get up in the level of the judicial part, like if you go from a local judge to a state judge or a federal judge or something like that, I think corruption decreases in the United States. That's not the case, I think, here. I think the judicial system here is non-judicial almost. It's a political judicial system. In the United States, that is becoming more common. For instance, federal judges, who are the judges who come before the Supreme Court generally, you can almost tell how a judge or a group of judges will rule depending on where they are. The judge, the most famous in the United States, is what they call the Ninth Circuit Appeals Court, which handles California and basically all of the West Coast. Most of the judges there were appointed by Democratic liberal presidents. They're all appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. Most of those judges are liberal judges, and they tend to give liberal opinions when a case comes to them. The Ninth Circuit Court, the most liberal court, is famous because it is the court or court. When I say court, there are actually 9 judges, but they speak for the group voting. It is the most overturned court in the United States. That is, once it leaves the Ninth Circuit and goes to the Supreme Court, which tends to be more balanced, right now it's balanced to the right, so to speak. Balanced, it's more right-leaning. It is the most overturned court. That is, they'll give an opinion that is liberal, and the Supreme Court will more often overturn that and say, no, you're wrong, and change the decision. There's also the more conservative. The Fifth Circuit Court, which is the southern part of the United States, where Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, that part of the United States, is more conservative. They're more inclined to give a decision on the conservative side. They are less often overturned by the Supreme Court, but they are also sometimes overturned by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is the last word if they choose to decide it. Sometimes, quite often, the Supreme Court will just say, no, we're not, whatever they said is what goes. We're not going to look at it. We're not going to touch it. Go away. And so, yes, corruption, but that's not really corruption in the sense of being paid under the table to make a decision. That occurs, but that's sort of a politicization of the court, which is becoming more and more apparent. There are Democrats. There's now a nominal six more conservative judges on the U.S. Supreme Court and 3 more liberal judges. Well, the Democrats want to add more judges, which they can do if they have control of the Senate and the House of Representatives, so that they can add more judges under a Democratic president who would appoint more liberal judges. That can be done. Very dangerous. They talk about it, but I don't think they'll ever do it, because once it's done, there's no going back. And the next time a Republican president comes in, has the opportunity to appoint conservative judges. And so it's right now, I think it's pretty much a dead question, but you never know. That's why the question marks are always there in the future.
Good morning, Drew.
Good morning.
My question is related to the difference between the United States and Argentina. That, of course, there are a lot. What will you copy from the United States to adapt it or to use it in Argentina?
That's an interesting question. I have over the years tried to do a lot of looking into Argentinian politics, this sort of stuff. I think Jose mentioned in my introduction that I wrote a 485-page plus idea or comparison of the United States in many ways to Argentina. Never published, because some of the people who read it and say, you can't publish this because they'll kill you here, because it was not terribly complimentary to much of Argentina. I apologize for that, but it is what it is, in my opinion, one man's opinion. One thing I found, which surprised me a little bit until I got into it, is that the Argentinian Constitution is actually modeled on the U.S. Constitution, with some very important changes, deletions, and additions, but basically the Constitution of Argentina is modeled on the Constitution of the United States. I used to know the guy who did most of the work, and I can't remember. I know he was in Chile for a while, and he's a very famous name, and it's not coming to me. The guy who did most of the work on this. And maybe it'll pop in 10 minutes from now. I'll say, it was so-and-so, because that's the way my mind works these days. But it is very similar to the U.S. Constitution. One of the biggest differences that I found is that there is a clause at the end of the first article of the Constitution, I think it is. In the U.S. Constitution, it very specifically says this is the Constitution to be handled by we, the people of the United States. Argentina, it doesn't say exactly. It says almost the same thing, except at the end it says by we, the representatives of the people of Argentina. Doesn't seem like much. Big difference. Means that once those representatives get into, that is, congressmen, senators, all of this, They are in control. What the people say has no importance anymore. They are in control. It says it in the Constitution. We, the representatives of the people of Argentina, we run the show. In the U.S. Constitution, it says we, the people of the United States, run the show. This is, of course, not the exact words, but this is my interpretation of what the words mean. And so, even though the model is the same, the use of that model is significantly different. So, I apologize if I insult people, but the Argentine model of the use of that constitution is not very good. Being polite about it. Luckily, I have not, in my 35 years here, or 36 years actually, I have not been forcibly pushed into this. I have avoided politics as much as possible. I have never applied for Argentine citizenship because Argentine citizenship requires that I have to vote for some of these people. And I said, no, I don't want that. I can vote in the United States. I do vote in the United States sometimes, but not always. As I said, I did not vote for Donald Trump in 2016, and I did not vote for Donald Trump in 2020 because I didn't want to vote for Donald Trump, even though I agreed with his policies. If I became, well, now that I'm so old, I guess it wouldn't matter because I wouldn't have to vote anyway, but I never wanted to get officially into the politics of Argentina because I don't like it.
Good morning. Knowing that you've been here for so long time, which aspect of Argentina you love the most?
Oh, that's easy. Argentina, I love Argentine. I married an Argentine woman. I think Argentinian women are fantastic. Argentinian wines are fantastic. Argentinian meats are the best in the world, and I've eaten meat in a lot of different places, the beef. On the personal basis, I have been able to live a more relaxed life in Argentina. Just to give you an example, when I worked at Kodak in northern New York, upstate New York, in the wintertime, which began September, October, and went on through, in some cases, May, heavy snow, blizzards, all this kind of stuff. It's dark there. I would get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, drive to work in the dark, in the wintertime, of course, in the dark, in the snow. Might take me 2 hours to get to work because you have to drive very slow and carefully. And when I came home at night, it was 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It was dark. It was snowing. And it took me 2 hours to get home again. And you didn't want to go out because the weather was so bad and the roads were so bad. And this, as I said, this was a long winter. My wife being from Cordoba, from Rio Tercero, me being from Texas, which is just like Cordoba, weather-wise and everything else, we decided when the opportunity arose, that's when we decided we either were going to move back to Texas or we were going to move to Argentina. I'm fairly adventurous in my life. And of course, at the time, when we made that decision, democracy had was returning to Argentina with Alfonsín. And quite frankly, we looked forward to moving in and sort of helping build, to put it one way, a new democratic system here. I could work here, she could work here. Our kids were young, so it didn't really matter to them one way or another. We had space here, the family quinta, this sort of thing. It looked like an ideal thing. After being here for a few years, the ideality of the whole thing began to go up in smoke as I became more familiar with the thing. But we stuck it out, and now I'm too old to go back. I'm settled here. I live a reasonably good life. I enjoy doing things like talking to you people. It's a diversion for me. I don't have to vote. I pay my taxes. And if it's something I don't like, I just let it go over my head and try to ignore it. In the United States, there are obvious advantages, economic advantages. If you choose your career properly, jobs are abundant in the United States. There are roughly 10 million jobs, not just truck drivers. If you get into programming or coding, as they call it nowadays, in my day it was called program anymore, you code. What's the difference? Oh, I don't know. We just changed the name. So if you get into that, if you can get into the United States, you can get a job, a good paying job. Computer coders, computer engineers, big demand in the United States still, and other jobs as well. If you want to be a plumber, you can train to be a plumber or take a 5-year course being a plumber and start taking home $70,000, $80,000 a year as a plumber. If you want to be a heavy equipment operator, a crane operator or anything like that, you get the training, you get the license, you can probably make $25, $35 an hour at that. Lots of good jobs in the United States. Welders, electricians, make good money if you want to work. If you want to go to college and get a degree in philosophy, not so good. That's a problem with a lot of people in the United States these days who go to school and become librarians and philosophers. And the job opportunities are not so great that way. But if you want to study coding, chemistry, physics, mathematics, engineering, those kinds of things, the jobs are there. You just have to do the work and get yourself on the list. What else? Well, there are lots of other advantages too. I mean, I enjoy going back to the United States to do things that I can't do here. I love Mexican food, Tex-Mex we call it. Sort of a mixture of a Texas version of Mexican food. I love that stuff. I make the best in town here. I also love Chinese food. I make the best in town here. Of course, there's no option in Rio Tercero. There is no other Chinese food. I make good Chinese food. Hot, spicy, good stuff. And those are the kinds of things I like to go back. I go back and visit my family, of course. But the roads are better in the United States. Although going to Cordoba nowadays is a lot different than it was when I first moved here. When I first moved here, you had this 2-lane road, and the weeds came right up to the asphalt. There's no way if you had a flat tire, there's no way you were going to pull off the road. This was well before your time, by the way, I'm sure. Maybe not, I don't know. But going to Cordoba was a jungle adventure. Now, piece of cake. Doesn't bother me at all. And I love driving standard transmission cars. In the United States, unless you buy a sports car, you don't get a standard transmission car. You have to pay extra for it. Here it's the opposite. If you want an automatic, you got to pay $10,000 now. A lot more money. Now that I'm getting old, I would love to have an automatic transmission car. My legs just gets a little tiring after a while, especially if you're driving in Cordoba. Anyway, but there are lots of things. But the main things in Argentina, the tranquility that I personally have, good wine, excellent beef, very beautiful women, and those kinds of things. You know, the superficial things to some people, but, you know, they're important too. Next. Anybody else?
Well, no, Drew, I think we have run out of time. We do appreciate you being here. It was really fascinating. I don't know about you, about your understanding. How was it? They have thousands of questions. Maybe we will invite you again. And I don't know if you have a delivery telephone for that Texan food or Asian food that you could tell us, and we can buy that food. If you are the best cook in the town.
Well, I don't know, I might do a little catering.
Okay.
The hardest part of cooking is chopping.
Okay.
Especially with Chinese food. Everything's in little pieces.
Yeah.
But beyond that, who knows?
That's a joke.
My experience now is I cook it for my family, which comes out to be 6 adults, and the kids don't. The grandkids don't eat it anyway. So, but I don't know if I could translate that into, it's sort of like a chemical scale up, going from a reactor this big into a reactor that has 3,000 liters in it. That might be a challenge.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Yes.
Okay, my pleasure.
All right.
Again.
Thank you.
Anytime.